Hi, this is Barbara Field. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Sacramento, California. And I started this channel so that people who are grieving losses could discover they're not alone. Maybe there's resources, and just hearing other people talk about their experience of grief helps you to know that all the ways to grieve are the right ways to grieve. And so today we're going to be talking with some people who are talking about losing a parent. And so I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourself and tell us about the person that you lost and whatever you want us to know about you and them. So let's start with Mary.
Hi, my name is Mary Pruitt. And well, I actually lost both parents probably about the same time. Both parents were diagnosed with dementia the same week. Um, and then I took on, along with my sister and four brothers, we pulled together to take care of them. Well, you never know what dementia is going to do. And when you have two parents that are very vibrant, my dad retired from the military, then he retired from the telephone company, then he flew his plane and did the Civil Air Patrol where he flew organs up and down California. He proctored for the state. He, you name it. My dad was also a Tuskegee Airman. So, that legacy. My mom, on the other hand, she was right there doing a lot of the same kinds of things, very vibrant. She did things that, like, as we went through school, um, she took on, doing the Black History Day, or the days where you do all these different kind of, where the whole school takes part of it. My mom would take that on and make sure that there were food and all kinds of things. She dressed up in costumes. My mom always dressed in costumes. So as I got older and I started to I managed retail stores for about 20 years. My mom would show up in a store and she might be Miss Piggy, or the next time I see her, she might be Cat in the Hat or Minnie Mouse, and she'd have the outfits on. And so my mom would bring in cookies and all kinds of things for the whole entire store. So my parents they did a lot in the community. They were both very religious, Catholic. So they did a lot of things with the Knights of Columbus and catechism and all of that. And so the grieving process started when they got diagnosed with dementia. I happened to be living at the house at the time because I noticed mom and dad just kind of doing different things. And so I moved in with them after a divorce, and slowly but surely, I had to watch my parents slip away. And at the same time, which at the time, when I found out about it, I thought, oh, I don't know. How am I going to do this? And I'm also in recovery. And so when I'd only had about a year clean, and then they were diagnosed. And so trying to take care of myself and taking care of them, I didn't know that I was going to be able to do that. But it went on. My dad went on to live 10 years. My mom went on to live past that. The last 5 years of her life, she didn't speak. She couldn't feed herself. She couldn't dress herself. She couldn't bathe herself. So everything you did for her, she was here, but not able to do anything. Whereas my dad spoke right up until the week before he passed away. Um, and it was just watching them fade away. I remember my heart just was crushed all the time, that they would be able to do something today, and then 2 days from now, they couldn't do it anymore. And what a process that was. But, in that process, I got to be with them for a long time. I tried to be ready for that. And even when it happened, I was able to be there when they both took their last breath. And I was very grateful for that. And I still am, that I was, had the opportunity to be the main caregiver, and take care of them. But watching them slip away and not being able to do the things that they had always done. I remember growing up and just feeling I was always scared to lose my parents. I think I lived in fear for, I don't know, probably till I was 30 years old. It's like, oh my God, I don't want them to go away. And, I never wanted that to happen. And they ended up being married 69 years. They ended up doing that together. They slept in the same bed every night. My mom, before the dementia, my mom, she was an alcoholic, and what I learned from that was that no matter what, even though my dad was mad at her a lot and she did a lot of crazy things when she was drinking, they stayed together. And I learned that that no matter what, you can do that. And I was grateful that they kind of went out together, so neither one of them, when they come into the room, my dad would look at mom and he'd say, who is that? And she'd say, who's that man? And I'm like, that's your wife. And he'd say, I've never been married before. And my mom would, well, I don't know who this man is, but she like welcomed him into the bed. And so I got to laugh a lot. I had to learn how to laugh a lot instead of cry, because there were a lot of days that I cried, and I just, I didn't know when it was going to happen, and when it did, I tried to be ready for it. And even now, I just we're coming up on my mom's date. Well, actually, my dad's this month. My dad passed away a week before he turned 90, and then my mom passed away in October, and she was 90. So I got to have him for a long time, and so I really worked on being grateful for having them for so long. And so that's how I've kind of turned that grief into gratitude, to help others. And then I work with, I'm an alcohol and drug counselor. I work with others. And just today, I talked to one of my patients about um, his parents are 80 years old, and he was there for a minute, but he was drinking the whole time, and then he moved out, and he's thinking about wanting to go back now that he's sober. And I try to tell him, I said, be grateful that they've been around for this amount of time, and what you get to do so that you don't feel regretful, sorrowful for not mending that. Um, it's time for you to make that decision and go back and do the best you can at trying to repair that, whatever happened for you to move out in the first place. And so I said, be grateful that you still have parents, because death is going to happen. And
Yeah.
even if it's coming, you're still not going to be ready for it. And so, yeah, just today we talked a long time around that, and really trying to get him to understand that if something happens without mending that, your grief is going to be even worse.
Right.
That's how.
Thank you. Okay, Toni, how about you?
Well, so it is funny listening to her. I'm like some kind of similar. I lost both of my parents. Unfortunately, I lost them both 17 hours apart.
Oh my goodness.
That is something that I never, ever, ever fathomed could happen. My mom and dad had been together since they were 13 and 14 years old. They got together in junior high, and were never apart. And for the most part, there was always jokes that there was no Frank without Lenora and no Lenora without Frank. And I didn't realize how true that was until the very end. They had very different medical conditions. My father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's um, probably 8 years before he finally passed. They both died on November 11th, 21. So we're coming up on 4 years. He had Alzheimer's. Mom, and he was always the very healthy one, right? He worked out, he tried to eat right. I mean, he walked every day at lunch. He was always very healthy. Mom had been smoking since she was 13. She was an alcoholic. She didn't eat right. She didn't, she abused her body. That's what my mom did. But she liked it, and she wasn't going to let anybody tell her otherwise. So she ended up getting lung cancer and congestive heart failure and all kinds of the other things that go along with abusing your body for many, many years. And as dad got sicker, she got worse because, right, that's how you self-medicate. You drink more to hide the pain of what you're experiencing when you see your loved one slipping away. As you said, it's very hard to see them not be who they are anymore. My dad was, and you're right, it never goes away. My absolute hero. He was one of my best friends. And, there were days where he didn't know me or my mom, and other days I'd walk in the room and he'd look at me and go, "Hey, baby." It was just so weird how he would just come back in those moments sometimes and recognize me even to the very, very end. But I'm an only child. And so when they both got ill, it sort of felt to me, I felt like I had to step up and pretty much do it all. Mom was kind of incapable of doing so. In fact, got herself into some really sticky situations with, I say air quotes, a roommate who, right shortly before COVID, dad got to the point that we ended up having to put him into a care facility, memory care facility, which actually was working out fine. It was right down the street. But when COVID hit, we weren't even allowed to visit. And it was just one of those things like, absolutely not, right? It's bad enough that he's not home, but to not be able to have any contact or, they would allow what they called these window visits, which was absolutely ridiculous with somebody with severe Alzheimer's, right? I mean, he didn't even understand what was happening, and he couldn't hear you. And you would wave and he would just look very confused. It was just awful. So we made the decision to go ahead and take him out of the care facility and bring him home. And so then I arranged for in-home healthcare, which in itself was a very interesting experience. But it ended up being good because the in-home caregivers could actually help with both of them. Mom was on oxygen, right? I mean, so they just had, once again, these very, very different medical conditions, but both sort of going downhill at the same time. And within a few years, mom had gone back and forth to the hospital in respiratory arrest 13 times in an ambulance, to the point where it was one of those crazy, I'd get a phone call. It could be 2 in the afternoon. It could be 2 a.m. And if I got that phone call, I had to be at the house because she was in full respiratory arrest. The ambulance would pick her up and they would just leave. They wouldn't even know that my dad was in the bedroom alone. It's kind of one of these crazy things, right? They're paying attention to my mom and had no idea that my dad was, obviously can't be alone by himself, and they would just leave. So I got in this routine of just very disruptive of my life. I just had to drop everything and just show up, and not having any other siblings to lean on. It was a lot, but I would do it again in a heartbeat. Long story short, they just went downhill together. My mother, ironically, with her 13th time to the hospital in that ambulance. My dad ended up going to the emergency room the same day. He just was sick and not doing well. He's down to 115 pounds. So I had dueling emergency rooms with mom and dad. They both came home on hospice that same week and died about 3 weeks later in bed holding hands. He passed at about 2:00 in the morning and she died at 7 p.m. that evening. Crazy. I mean, once again, I just never, ever, and I really feel like even though she never regained consciousness and actually physically looked at him, I just know she knew that he was gone. And she just didn't want to be here. She did not want to be here without him. And I'm kind of convinced that she willed it that way. And now I look at it and honestly, it couldn't have been any other way with the two of them. Very different experiences. My mother was actually, though, in denial. And I think that's what I said in the question, right? Where dad was obviously very ill. And so, but when I'd go with her to the doctor and they would tell her heart was only functioning at 20%, and perhaps you might want to think about hospice or making arrangements for, and she'd say, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to live many, many more years. Like she just was, yet she'd leave the hospital from cardiac arrest and would come home and immediately get a glass of vodka and smoke a cigarette. I mean, it just made no sense. She would not do what they told her to do to make herself better. So I think my biggest issue is that I felt like I couldn't really talk to her. I felt like there was so much that was unsaid between us. And she was mad at me a lot of the times for the decisions I had to make of getting that crazy roommate out of here that was literally stealing from her, literally stealing. Opened up a credit card, $20,000 to get her teeth fixed in my mother's name. Caregivers told me they saw her taking cash out of her wallet. And I'm here taking care of my dad, sleeping on the floor in his office while she's sleeping in my old bedroom. It was insane. I was like, I got to get her out of here. So that was step number one. But my mom was mad at me for making some of those decisions on her behalf. And I tried to explain to her, look at, if you were like, you know, I couldn't say it this way, but like, if you were thinking correctly, you would understand why I'm doing this. But I know darn well, if my dad knew what was happening, he would literally kick my butt for not handling this. So I'm going to handle it. So she would get mad at me. And so the last year and a half of her life, it was very contentious between us. And I love my mom to death. And I know that she loved me, but I didn't get to have any of those final conversations with her. I could once again say things about, well, Dad's not doing well. What do you think he would want? And so she'd answer me. And then I would say, well, maybe what about you? What would you think? And sometimes she'd answer. Sometimes she would just say, oh, we don't need to worry about that now. It's just bizarre to me. I just feel like I maybe it's just that I don't have closure. And I wish that we had been able to smooth over some of that tension that we had there of her almost being resentful of me, sort of having to take over on her behalf. My dad, I thought, what I think is the strangest thing for me, I really believed I was going to grieve my father so much more or differently because I was so close with him. And it's what I was surprised about is it's not that way at all. It ended up not being at all. I like you was holding both of their hands when they passed, and I am grateful for that. But I literally felt my dad cartwheel out of his body. I don't know how to explain it. His father had died of Alzheimer's at 57 years old. And at that time, I was 12. And I remember him saying, that is the last thing I want. The last thing I want. He's like, don't you ever let me go through that. And I actually heard in my head, and I think I even told Barbara this before. He's like, Tone, what the heck? I told you. And I was like, what was I going to do? Push you in the pool, Dad? You know, it was almost like this. But when he passed, I felt like it was relief. He was finally free. With Mom, it just seemed so senseless. It was almost like she just chose it. And I don't know. I think that's what's kind of hurtful. I miss them both terribly. I just have to tell myself all the time, it was her life. It was her choice. There's nothing I could do about it. But I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I could have done something differently, but I don't believe that I could have. You know, I really run through it so much, and I truly believe I did absolutely everything I could, and it was always in their best interest. And I always tried to do it with love and care and grace. And I think she knows that. Maybe in the moment, she just couldn't appreciate it. So I guess that was the thing that I told Barbara. It was just that I wanted to discuss. I think as for me, I just feel like maybe with Mom, I didn't get closure that I feel like I had with Dad.
Yeah. So there is a very high incidence of spouses having heart attacks right away after the death. Yes. There's something called broken heart syndrome, and it's very real. The percentage is alarmingly high. Okay, Samantha, welcome, and tell us about you and your dad.
So I lost my dad when I was 20. He was 43 years old. And at the time I'm 39 now. So it's been 19 years. And at the time when he passed, I was living out of state, across the ocean in Hawaii, and my dad was living here in California. And I was very close with my dad. Out of all the people in the world, I feel like we were the most similar. And I mean, we were very close. I had a great relationship with my dad. Even when I lived, at a distance, we talked 3 times a day, like clockwork. I talked to him in the morning. I talked to him if I was at work on my lunch. I talked to him in the evening before bed, and he was just a wonderful person. And I can say that very unbiasedly because, you know, he worked for our local hospital in the IT department, and everyone at the hospital knew him. And when he passed, they put together this book, this scrapbook for us, and they wrote all of these incredible memories about my dad, just little snippets of things that touched them about him. And he was just a beautiful person. And one thing that, you know, I saw in that book just over and over was that people talked about was his love for his family was just the most important thing. And he was just so proud of me for anything, for just the smallest, dumbest things. And I really credit him for making me believe that I'm capable of anything. You know, with hard work, whatever I want, it is not out of reach. And I didn't realize that not all people feel that way until later in life. And, you know, I look back at how my dad was to me, and it, you know, when I lost him, it was such a unexpected tragedy that I think I was in a lot of shock the first year. um you know, my dad had asthma. He lived here in the Central Valley, which is just awful air. He was very prone to pneumonia, and he had gotten pneumonia and they didn't know, and he ended up suffocating and having a heart attack from kind of like it started as an asthma attack but was really fueled by the asthma. And so he had suffered that on his way to work one morning. And I would say the first year I really didn't grieve. Even my mom had commented that she was more upset than I was. And I didn't really feel his absence until my 21st birthday, when I had the whole family there, including my stepmom and my sister with my dad. And I think that was really the realization that I was like, he's gone. And I mean, it's been a very long journey for me. You know, at the time I was in my 20s and I turned to alcohol, and I didn't go through healthy processes of grieving, you know, until probably my very end of my 20s and now through my 30s. And I don't have any bad feelings about my dad. I don't have unfinished things or closure. The thing that I struggle with the most is just not having that person here, and thinking about all of these milestones in my life that, you know, I'm still hoping to have, and he won't be there. And, you know, it's like I struggle to live a life without him. I miss him, you know. And I have one thing that someone told me recently that really just turned on a light bulb was, you know, I was told that his love didn't die when he died, and that, you know, it still lives in me. And I never really understood that, but I see it now. You know, I see it when I keep going and push through hard things and pull myself out of it. You know, when I believe that I can do this, you know, I'll figure it out. Or, you know, even his morale, I have such a strong, this thing in me that makes me stand up for things, for what's right, even if I have to face consequences for standing up what's right. And I know that that comes from him. And I know not everybody has good relationships with their parents like that, but, you know, I think the one thing that I would want to share with people is that, you know, we even though they're physically not here, we can still find the pieces of them that they've left behind. And I know it doesn't substitute them being gone, but it has, realizing that has really helped me, you know, with some of my grieving. And, you know. And then the other thing is, I mean, look, it's been 19 years, and I mean, I can cry about my dad. It hurts just as much as it did the day that I found out that he passed. And I mean, I feel the same way. I don't think that, you know, there's any time frame. I don't think it ever goes away. I think it's just that we learn to live without them.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of those are really hard, especially that losing both parents at once. That's, yeah. So Mary had specifically wanted us to talk about that idea of dementia, and that's kind of a common theme with three of us anyway, and just what it's like when the body is still there and the person is gone. Strangely, in my life, until it got really bad, that was almost an upgrade. So my mom had borderline personality disorder. She was very angry and mean and resentful and could hold a grudge for 100 years. But apparently you have to have an organized brain to hold a borderline personality disorder in place. And so in the early days of the dementia, when she couldn't hold a grudge because she couldn't even remember what she was mad at. And so she became a nicer and nicer version of herself. So there was this little golden window when the mean lady that I grew up with was gone, and the nice person that had been trapped under that personality disorder showed up and still remembered who I was. And so it was just a much, still there was all the complications. And so she went to Triple R. It was like grandma daycare. So I would drop her off in the morning, and she loved it there. She was so excited. She didn't want to come home, but I knew she was safe. It was like summer camp for demented adults, and she loved it. They were so good to her. And so that, it was strangely, it was like reverse of what everyone else experiences. Yeah, my mom went away and this nice person showed up. And so it was kind of a weird experience. And then she then was pretty much didn't know a lot of stuff. And then it was just hard. And like I would, like, I think it was one of you said, I think it might have been Mary, one day they can do stuff and then the next day they can't do stuff. And you don't know what's missing until usually some crisis occurs. So that having to watch for that, and it's sort of like their brain goes backwards. So you end up with a tall 18-month-old that can reach everything. And so you just never know what sort of is going to happen next. Like one day I heard this crunching noise, and I go in the room and she's got the bowl of ornamental marbles. There's like a crystal bowl with all these pretty marbly things, and she thinks they're candy. And so, and then another time, I left her closet door open. She didn't remember the drawers and closets opened anymore, which was good because she came out and she had put on everything in the closet. She looked like a wrestler. She had on all the clothing in the closet. She just kept getting dressed until she ran out of clothes.
Wow.
Well, you didn't come, so I just got myself dressed. Okay. So some of them were funny and all of them were sad. And then my brothers didn't see her very often. So we went out to lunch one time, and the waitress came and said, "What would you like?" And I started to order for her. And my brother said, "You don't have to be the bossy big sister. She can order for herself." I'm like, "Alrighty, Mom, what would you like?" She just stared at me like, "What do you mean, what would I like?" I'm like, "What would you like to eat?" Well, I don't know. And I looked at my brother, "How long do we have to do this?" Okay, never mind. So then after she took the order, I started to take away the menu, and my mom tried to grab it back. And my brother's like, just let her have the menu, it won't hurt anything. All right. So pretty soon she's trying to eat the food and the pictures on the menu. And she opens up a sweet and low, and she's adding sweet and low to the picture of the iced tea on the menu. I'm like, let me know when you've had enough. So about the time she complained that the steak was tough in the picture, my brother said, all right, take the menu. So he just didn't know about the decline. She looked fine. She recognized everyone. She just didn't realize that wasn't real foods. So it was those kind of that are funny, and yet my mother was so smart. She would stand and do her ironing and answer every question on Jeopardy, like every question. And to see her reduced to adding sweet and low to the iced tea on the menu is just a tragedy. Yeah, so any other thoughts you guys have about that whole caring for a parent whose brain is going quietly away?
For me, growing up, my dad and I butt heads, I mean, for a long time, probably until I was about, I don't know, maybe, well, probably until he was diagnosed, but for the most part, really hard, up until about maybe 45 or 50, something like that. And I just, would be beside myself. It just, why can't I have a relationship with my dad? Because I looked up to him. He knew how to do everything. Everything. I mean, we never saw a repair person come to the house. And, if the roof needed to be done, then he'd get me and my brothers, and we would go and put the roof on. If the house needed to be painted, we'd get out there and we'd paint it. If the tree needed to be trimmed, then we got the chainsaws out and we did all of that. And I always used to think, I just really want to have a relationship with my dad like that, because I admired all of that. Well, it caused problems when I, moved out and I ended up having 3 ex-husbands, trying to find somebody that was just like my dad. As much as I would say I couldn't stand him, that was what I measured, men to. And then right before or when he was diagnosed with dementia, he still had a lot of his mind. He pulled all of us together. We had a meeting, and he wanted me to be in charge of everything. I was like, couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. That my dad, and then after he passed away, lots of his friends, people that knew my dad told me all kinds of stories about him being proud of me of this and that I did that. And I'm like, well, he never even said he loved me, I don't ever remember my dad telling me that he loved me the whole time I was growing up. But I got to hear from a lot of other people. So as much as I'm grateful that, I got to spend the time with him, I didn't really get to spend the time with him that I wanted, before all that happened. And I think that's probably the biggest grief that I have, is that when he passed away, that I didn't get a chance to us have really a relationship where I wasn't upset with him all the time. But when he took his last breath, I was sitting there, and before he took his last breath, a tear came down. And I knew that he was getting ready to go. And he looked at me as this tear was coming down, and it was as if to say, I'm sorry that we couldn't have a relationship, but you're the person that I want to see on my way out. So I have a lot of comfort in that. So when I feel sad about that, I have a lot of comfort in the fact that I was able to, to spend that time. Whereas Samantha, you didn't get to do that. And even though it was a long death, it felt like a long death and a lot of tears. I feel like, I got to spend that time and really try to understand my parents. For, my mom's drinking and my dad my dad was military and everything was just had to be so, and was upset with him all the time. But I got an opportunity to take that time to really understand my parents and how they were. They came up in a time in the depression. My mom used to like feed us, and I mean, I have had a weight problem ever since. My mom used to feed us like we were never going to eat again, and food everywhere. And then, I got to learn that they grew up and there were a lot of days that they didn't have food. Well, they never said that. And when you're upset about why you're going to the grocery store again, you already spent, $300 or $400 just a couple of days ago, and then go and do it again. Um, I I feel like, that time that I was able to spend with them, I got to learn a lot about my parents. So I do have a lot of comfort in that.
That's cool.
Mhm.
So Toni, any more about that process of having a parent with dementia?
Yeah, it is really hard. I mean, I think for me, my dad was very active. He was an outdoorsman. He loved to hunt. He loved to fish. And my dad was like the Fonz, right? Literally, everybody used to say he was like the Fonz. He was just cool. And I think what broke my heart was just knowing that he couldn't do the things that he wanted, that he loved to do, that unfortunately he was living his worst nightmare, and that he already had to watch his dad pass from Alzheimer's. And it truly was his worst nightmare, and he was going through it. Um, but also to watch him do things that I know he was very macho, and things that I know he would have just like literally not been okay, would not been okay with, doing this or doing that, or, you know, having to have somebody wipe his butt, or, I mean, just the simple things that happen, or having to feed him, or just some of the crazy things that he did. Just, I mean, I came out when he happened to sneak out. I'll never forget this. I had a baby monitor, and it was like you never slept. I would just continue to look at it and make sure. One night, sure enough, I look up and he's not in the bed, and I go running through the house like a crazy woman. He was sitting in the kitchen, but he had pretty much every faucet in the house was on. I don't know how he did this while I was asleep. Every faucet was on. There was no light in the kitchen, but he had opened up the fridge and pulled almost everything out of the fridge and taken an entire tray of brownies and put the entire container of mayonnaise on top of it. And he was sitting in the kitchen, leg crossed, staring at the wall, like he was looking out a window in the dark. And I didn't want to scare him. And I remember just like, hey, Dad. And he kind of, he looked at me, and I just said, were you hungry? And he goes, yep. Just one of those things. He took an entire container. My dad used to tie his own flies because he was a fly fisherman. He took the entire carrier of flies with hooks and poured it down his pants. I don't know why, but everybody was like, oh my gosh, if one of those sticks, we're going to be in big trouble. He's going to end up at the hospital, right? They got barbs. Just crazy, just stuff. It was just some of the insanity. It's like, what in the world made you think, or like you said, Barbara, he would pick something up and try to eat it. And it's like, what in the world? But just literally watching them slip away. And I think what hurts the worst is when they don't recognize you. I know I was the son, that rose and set in my dad's eyes. I know that I was, but when he didn't know who I was, sometimes that it breaks your heart, right? It's like, oh, where'd you go, Dad? Then there'd be days I'd walk in, he'd go, hey, baby, like as if it was just, I don't know. It's just hard. It's a roller coaster ride. I think that you just got to try to take it day by day. Capture the moments that they're there. I'd always say, I always felt like he understood. Honestly, the way, I know this sounds crazy, but I learned so much more about Alzheimer's. Sometimes you would talk to him and he wouldn't necessarily respond, but the look on his face was almost like he kind of understood me, but he couldn't find the words to reply. Or it's like it just wouldn't come together. It was almost like you could almost see it in his eyes, like he wanted to say something or he wanted to respond and he just couldn't formulate it. And then he would get kind of frustrated. But sometimes in those times he would just reach out and squeeze my hand. And I just knew it was like part of him was still there. As much as he was gone, part of him was still there. So I just held on to those moments the best that I could and tried to say goodbye, and it was a very long goodbye. It's torturous as a child to just watch that happen.
Yeah.
But gotta hang on to what you got. So
Yeah. So Samantha, you wanted us to talk about that huge sense of loss that you have because you really loved your dad and you were very close to him. And he was like a mentor and a voice of wisdom and all kinds of good stuff. And so going forward in life with those holes where your dad used to be, let's talk some more about that.
Yeah. It was a really big loss, as far as my identity. And even now, I feel like I'm still kind of coming in to myself on my own without that dependence on him. I think what really affected it too was, after my dad had passed, my stepmom didn't do the greatest of things. And unfortunately, my dad did not have any type of will. And to kind of be left out of everything, to not get to look through his stuff and be like, I want to keep this shirt, it's super sentimental to me, or this hat, it really made me question, am I even his daughter? And I mean, I know, I was everything to my dad, but just losing him and then not feeling like, I felt like the redheaded stepchild, and it's been a really difficult thing. And, even now it's like, just, I'm at a time in my life where I'm struggling through some things, and I wish I had his emotional support a lot. And it's been I feel like, it's just a learning experience for me. Just, every day I find my footing, and I feel like what has been helping, kind of affirm my identity is the realization that, well, he's gone, but I do still carry these things that I believe are from him, him raising me and teaching me. And, one of the things I'll never forget, he had done something that really upset me and wasn't okay. And, I kind of put him in his place, and I'll never forget when he apologized and he said, sometimes kids teach the parents. And, it's like, I take that with me now, in the workplace with my family. I feel like we all mess up, and, it's okay to mess up and admit you had messed up and apologize and just be accountable. And it's like, I've just noticed as I've gotten older, I feel like more of what I think I lost is starting to come back through as I, kind of, I don't want to say heal, but as my grief changes, it evolves. And as it evolves, I do feel like that identity is starting to work its way back in.
Well, that's great. And how about Mary, like what are the holes that one of your parents used to fill that is just an empty hole now?
I think on my mom's part, my mom never forgot a birthday. And my mom knew how to make, she decorated cakes. So weddings, like when I got married for the second time, my mom did the wedding cake, and absolutely beautiful. So growing up, we got to pick what type of cake we wanted. So mine was always a Barbie, the Barbie doll was in the middle, and then the dress. And then one of my brothers was like a Jack in the Box. He was jumping out. And then another one had a football field because he played football. So on our birthdays, all the way up until my mom couldn't do it anymore, she would show up at my job with a Barbie cake, dressed in some kind of outfit, embarrassing me. And I so miss that. I used to think when my mom showed up, like one time she came to I was having a store meeting. All the store managers in the district and the district manager and regional manager were in my back room at my store. And my mom, we were back there, the door was closed, and all of a sudden a puppet comes from around the door. It's a leprechaun. And so it's talking to everybody, and everybody's looking like, who is that? And I'm like, oh my God. I go, it's my mom. And they go, how do you know that? Well, you know anybody else that would do something like that? And then when she popped out from behind the door, she was dressed like a leprechaun. She had cookies for everybody. And, we're in this serious meeting. My mom used to show up at my stores, and it didn't matter. Like, I would get a call and say, Miss Pruitt, there's Miss Piggy walking through the store. And I'd say, okay, well, does she have a jump rope and a bunch of little kids on it? Yeah. And does she have a big tray of cookies? Yeah. And I said, that's my mom. They're like, you're kidding. I was like, she's coming to see all of us. And she did that at every single job I ever had until she couldn't do it anymore. And for my brothers too, and my sister, who's 14 years older than I am. So my sister is now 83 years old. And up until, mom couldn't do it anymore, she showed up at our jobs with our cake on our birthdays and dressed in an outfit. And I so miss being embarrassed. I just really grieve that. My mom was pretty incredible when she wasn't drinking, that was the thing, is that she drank and it was bad, but when she wasn't drinking, she was the most incredible person you would ever meet. And I still have people that say, man, you remember when your mom showed up at, Mervin's, and she was dressed like Miss Piggy with the little ears and the dress on with the ruffles in the back and all that. Yeah, I remember. I remember. And I said, I so miss that. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that my mom was always so conscious of not only me, but others too. If she knew somebody else was having a birthday or something was going on, my mom, she went out of her way to make sure that they were celebrated. She brought balloons. She just did that for everyone. And I miss that to this day. I really do.
I bet. I'm sure when you were younger, it was like, oh, mom. But then when you get older, it's fun, right?
Yeah, well, I was embarrassed until I was probably about 50, because I'm like, oh, here she comes. Oh my God. I'm in a brand new job, and, you're trying to be all professional. And then here's your mom all dressed in Cat in the Hat, and it's your mother.
How about you, Toni? What are the holes?
I just, like I said, they were both like my best friends, and through it all, what I miss right now is, like, if I feel like I'm in a quandary of some sort, or I'm not sure what to do, my dad had the most sage advice. I knew that I could come and I could talk to them about anything, both of them, mainly dad, about certain things, but he just had this way of putting things just in perspective for me. And just, he'd be like, Tone, this is that. And, my dad it was always take the high road, right? You never have to live with anybody but yourself. You're the one that has to wake up and look at yourself in the mirror every morning. Doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. And he always taught me to live my life by that standard. So I think when I just feel a little lost or confused about what I should do, I just want to pick up the phone and go, Dad, what should I do? And can't do that anymore. That's probably what I miss the most.
Yeah, that's hard. So my parents were really broken and crabby, but you could sort of turn that into a resource. Like, if one of us had like a business idea or something that we wanted to do, we would kind of dream it all up. And then we would call my dad, and my dad would poke holes in it. But still, it ended up being good, because it'd be like, okay, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't worried about that. So you could develop solutions for all of that. Or once you listen to his little crabby self, you realized those are insurmountable obstacles. So it wasn't offered as feedback. It was offered more like, well, you dumb shit. But nonetheless, you could use it as wisdom, right? So, and he had an incredible work ethic. I'm sure my workaholism comes from my dad, and also my dad and both my mom and my stepmom and my dad did a lot of volunteer work, and I've always volunteered a lot. I see way too many clients for way too little money.
Yeah.
So so I don't know that those are like holes. I don't miss having crabby people, but they did offer something.
Yeah.
Okay, so now at the end of these, I always ask people like 1 minute wisdom. So if you wanted to make sure that anybody who saw this, if they missed anything else you said, what is the one thing you want people to know? And I think mine would be there is no wrong way to grieve, that your journey is your journey. And the best thing people can do for us is support us on our journey and kind of maybe hold the flashlight, but not tell us you shouldn't be going that way. So that my thing is just to understand whatever you're going through is what you need to go through. If it's taking a long time, then therapists like me are only too happy to help you. If it seems so horrible that it's really debilitating, we're happy to help you. But there is no therapist in the world that can provide you with a fast forward button through your grief. It just takes as long as it takes.
Yeah.
So Samantha, you said it earlier, but say it again. What is your 1 minute of wisdom that you want people to take from you?
That we still keep them alive, and even finding, even if someone doesn't have as great of a relationship or didn't have as great of a relationship like you talk about with your parents, you can still hold on to those good things and keep the goodness of them alive, keep their love alive, and that'll never go away as long as we keep it there.
That's great. Awesome. How about you, Toni? What's your 1 minute wisdom?
Being an only child and losing both parents, it changed my entire family dynamic, right? I honestly, like, what do you do when you go from a family of 3 to 1? So it doesn't just break your heart, it changes who you are. And I think you just have to be patient with yourself and realize that it's a process, right? That I think you go through forever. From that point forward until you pass, you're forever going to be learning something new about it. And just give yourself grace. I mean, some days you need to cry, some days you need to laugh, some days you need to remember. Some days it hurts, some days it doesn't. You've just got to learn that you have to get to know the new you, and be okay with whoever that is. And like she said something earlier about how it just truly does just change who you are. And, but it's going to be okay. All right. You're going to get through it. So,
Yeah.
then one day at a time, one day at a time.
The thing is that you're for as long as you're alive, you're going to be. So it's not like you can say, never mind, just kidding. Like in the middle of labor, just kidding. I don't want to have a baby. This is too much work. Put it all.
Right. Yep.
Okay, Mary, how about you? What is your 1 minute wisdom for us?
I think that I would say, and I've said it a lot, when you're going through something like that and people say, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I've heard many people say they don't want to hear that. And so I've always prided myself on not saying that, and always saying that you're in my thoughts and in my prayers always, and to not ever worry about what anybody thinks about, because only time heals. And I try to stay true to that. I try to stay true to just really reaching out, like even after it's been, I thought about somebody today that lost their mom, I don't know, probably 10 years ago. And they all of a sudden was in my brain. And I just reached out. I sent a text and I said, just thinking about you today. I hope all is well. Just to remember those kind of things to do for people, and just to remind them that there's no time limit, only time heals, and it doesn't matter what anybody thinks about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's another whole topic unto itself, the things people say to you that make it worse instead of better. But I love that. I'm keeping you in my prayers. I'm not going to pretend I know what you're going through or I totally get it, but I want you to know I care about you and I'm praying for you. That's awesome. So if you guys have any books or resources that have been useful for you or helpful, be sure and send those, and I'll put those in the show notes so people can reap the benefit of your having discovered these things. And I just want to thank you so much for doing this. It's always such an honor when you choose to make yourself vulnerable like this and tell your story so that other people can tell theirs. And I just am very grateful. So I'm going to turn off the recording and thank you again.